Well, welcome everyone. It's a joy, a thrill to be here today with you. I'm Melissa Foyer. I am the career services coach for the Trachtenberg School, and I am excited to have you all here to speak with Justin and Brittany. And I'm going to let them take over right away so we don't waste any time. And we will absolutely have time for questions. Just a note that if you can turn your camera on, that is always great. Look, we have a lovely group coming in. Justin and Brittany, I'm turning this over to you.
Well, thank you so much for having us, Melissa. We appreciate the opportunity we always enjoy talking to students about what our organization is and what we do. And we're currently looking for a policy analyst, so it's very timely. I'll maybe say very quickly who I am, and then I'll let Brittany say who she is. And then we've got like maybe 10 minutes of prepared material that I'll just share some slides about our organization, and then hopefully we'll definitely have time for questions after that, if that's okay. Um, my name is Justin Brown, and I'm one of the associate directors at JLARC. And JLARC stands for the Joint Legislative Audit and Review Commission. And we are part of the Virginia General Assembly. But I've been here for a long time. I've been here over 20 years. But I'll let Brittany introduce herself as well.
Hi, everyone. My name is Brittany Utz. I'm a senior legislative analyst at JLARC, and I've been at JLARC about 8.5 years.
So I will share these slides. Let's see, can you all see that? Somebody give me a thumbs up or a yes.
We see.
Great. So, yeah, I thought I'd just start out with some kind of high-level background information about our agency, and I'm going to turn it over to Brittany to talk a little bit more detail about the type of work we do, and then I'll just wrap up with kind of the mechanics of how to apply to work with us. Um, we are kind of an interesting organization. We were set up in the 70s, and there was quite a push at the state level for legislatures to have access to their own program evaluation and policy expertise. And there was, as it's been explained to me, kind of two reasons for that. One was government grew a lot in the 60s, through a lot of the Great Society programs. So there was just a lot more to kind of understand and pay attention to in state government after the 60s and in the early 70s. So the legislature was kind of feeling like it needed to have a little bit more staff capacity. The other thing that was going on, obviously, was the Watergate scandal under Nixon, and that really kind of was a light bulb for state legislatures as well, that they needed to kind of pay attention to what was going on in the executive branch. So we were set up in 1973, and we're kind of an interesting organization. There's a member component, so there's 9 senators and 5 delegates, and those are usually the either senior most or kind of the folks in the leadership. So a lot of membership from the budget committees and the various leadership in the House and the Senate. And Brittany and I are part of about 30 professional full-time staff. And unlike the members who we do our work for, we are very strictly nonpartisan, do fact-based and objective work, and really focus on kind of the specific policy analysis, and don't really worry about the political part, which is nice to be able to do that. This just gives you an example of the type of work we do. We've got, several different big categories of work. The biggest thing we do are kind of policy evaluations and program evaluations or policy studies, and that's what most of our staff work on. And on the left side of the slide there, I have just some examples in recent years of some policy topics that we've looked into. On the right side of the screen there is just some examples of some ongoing things that we do. We have a small group of staff that just specialize in doing those types of things. So organizationally we do, but most people aren't involved in that. And so I'll just let you kind of read what's on the slide there. But between those two things, we have pretty good purview over kind of the range and scope of scale of what state government does. I guess the other thing I'd emphasize here about the evaluation side, and Brittany could talk about this as well, you know, we're uh, relatively small compared to what the totality of what the legislature could ask us to look into. So we are policy generalists. So we over time you may develop expertise in a particular policy area, but it is not uncommon for in someone's first few years here to work on a pretty wide range of policy topics. And I think one of the things that keeps people here is that because it's kind of this renewal and change over time. But some people stay here for a while and then they go do something else where they can specifically focus on a certain policy topic. So we bounce around quite a bit just based on what the legislature asks us to look into. This is just something out of our statute, which isn't terribly interesting, but this was something that was put in place in 1973 and it has not changed since then. So it's just a reminder that kind of our mission is pretty simple and it's endured over time, but it's just looking at ways to make state government more efficient and more effective. And there's some, focus sometimes on providing better services to the citizens of the Commonwealth, which is really kind of similar to effectiveness. But that's been in place since our agency was created. This just shows you what our org chart looks like, and we're highly structured around the research teams that do the work. One thing I would point out that, when I kind of talk to people around the country who maybe do something similar to we do, I feel we're fortunate because we have a professional full-time research methodologist who really helps our analysts on some of the more complex methodological tasks we try to do. And that's so important to the rigor of our work. We've always had that, and we think it's pretty important to continue to have that. And we also have a full-time professional editor and a full-time professional graphics designer who I think, really help us take kind of the research that we do and explain it and convey it well to, primarily our part-time legislative members, but also the public more broadly. So we take that pretty seriously in terms of how we set the agency up. We do our work in teams. And usually a team is led by a more experienced analyst, a person we call a project leader. Over time, that's, been people that have had, as minimal as 5 to 7 years experience. But right now we're at a point where I think our least experienced project leader has been here 10, 12, 11 years, something like that. So we have an experienced analyst that runs the project, and then usually it's 2 to 3 other analysts that might be a new hire or somebody who's been here 5, 6, 7, 10 years and it has a lot of experience. So we try to blend together the skill sets, but the work is done in teams, and I think people typically like that because the quality of the research is better, and the process I think works better. This is kind of a confusing slide, and I'm not going to talk you through this, but just to emphasize a couple of things. Our projects are pretty long term, especially compared to what you might do in school. It's usually 9 to 12 months for one of our studies. The other thing I'd point out is because we're generalists in part, but also because, if I unleash a team on a bureaucracy, it imposes a pretty substantial administrative burden. So we really plan out our work very thoroughly, and you'll see kind of the first phase of each of these illustrative projects is that planning piece. And Brittany can attest, we spend a lot of time, multiple months planning out how we're going to do our work. And we think it's important to do that. I guess the thing I'd say is we also spend a fair bit of time on the back end, kind of deciding what we're going to say and how we're going to say it. And there's a variety of reasons for that. But one reason is something I alluded to earlier, which is, um, we work for a part-time legislature and a lot of them have other jobs. And so explaining to them in as clear way as we possibly can, kind of what's working and what's not, what needs to be changed. We spend a lot of time on that as well after we've done our research. So this is really kind of where the rubber meets the road. This is actually a picture of Brittany giving a presentation to our commission. And I feel very fortunate that we, every month when the legislature's not in session, have about 2 hours with our commission members to report out to them the results of the work that we've done. And it's a fairly high stakes circumstance because it's a live thing and it's public. And it's really where the policy work we do kind of meets the messiness of politics. And sometimes there's some pretty contentious back and forth, either with our legislative members or even the subjects of the reviews that we've done. And so it's kind of where the scrutiny comes at the work we've done. But this is a picture of Brittany doing that. As I recall, she did a fantastic job on that presentation. And I think for people that have been here a while and get the opportunity to do that, it's really kind of um, the fun part of doing the research because this actually puts it in front of real decision makers. It gives you a chance to have an impact, which I think is pretty cool. And in terms of impact, I guess what I would close with for now, before I turn it over to Brittany, is, since we've been put in place, our budget is about $5.5 million a year, and it's primarily for staffing. But since we've been creative, we've saved, $1.5 billion. So a big ROI for the state there, and that the text may be too small at the bottom, but we track kind of which of our recommendations are implemented, and I think also maybe as importantly, when is there either a bill put in or a budget amendment put in that would implement one of our recommendations, and that percentage and those numbers kind of bounce around year to year. But historically, we have a pretty good hit rate in terms of our membership or others that aren't our commission listening to what we tell them and taking our advice and putting things in to make government better. So I think next we were going to have Brittany talk about what it's like to actually do some of the work. So Brittany, I'll turn it over to you.
Yes. So I'm just going to give you an overview and a little bit better of an understanding of kind of the day-to-day, what it's like to be a JLARC analyst. We do both quantitative and qualitative research at JLARC. So the types of things that you're working on can vary from day to day. But first, on the qualitative side, two methods that we commonly use are interviews and site visits. Interviews, I would say, are probably one of, if not the most widely used of our research methods. And we can be talking to agency staff, stakeholders, experts from other states, national subject matter experts, kind of a wide variety of folks. But I would say one of the most common interviews that we do are with program staff of the agency that we're looking at. Because it helps us to get a sense for how programs are actually working on the ground and kind of any challenges that agency staff are facing or things that they would like to see improved. And our interview structure can vary from kind of more informal, we're just looking for general background information. So it's kind of a loose, more fluid discussion to more kind of formal, structured. We've got a set list of questions of things that we want folks to answer for us. And then we'll also sometimes do larger focus groups with multiple individuals at the same time, depending on what the study is. And then on the right side there, we also do site visits, and that's we don't do these on every study, but on some studies it can be really useful for us to kind of get out in the field and go and see programs and things in action. And so just some examples of things there that we might observe would be schools, correctional facilities, workforce development offices, things like that. It can be a wide range of places we might go out and take a look at if it's useful for us to do those kinds of observations. And so JLARC also conducts surveys and collects data. On the survey side, that's really helpful for us to get information from a large number of people where it may not be feasible for us to do that number of interviews with folks. Surveys can be a really useful way to kind of broaden who we're able to get structured feedback from. And so we've got some examples of ones that we've done there. This was several years ago now, but I know a big one that we had done was of all state employees. We surveyed 10,000 people and got their feedback on kind of their satisfaction with their compensation and benefits and things like that. So it really helps us reach a wider audience if we're trying to collect information. And then also on the data collection side, It could be new or unanalyzed information from state agencies or from other various sources. And we might be requesting data from a database that an agency already has and maintains, or we could be using our own data collection instrument that we've developed to gather new data from somewhere if it's not otherwise available. And so then we've got some examples listed there of the types of data that we might be looking at. So more specifically on the data side of things, we're analyzing existing data, but also creating and analyzing new information. And one thing that I would like to point out is that because of JLARC's identity, we have 100% access to data that's available at other state agencies. And this is a bit different than the type of research that you might be doing in college, because then you typically only have access to data that's publicly available. But one really nice thing about JLARC is that we have access to any state agency data that's relevant to our work. And so that really allows us to do more meaningful analysis and present new information in our reports that may not have previously been known or well understood because we have that access. So we might be analyzing data sets that already exist, like juvenile recidivism data. We can also create and analyze new information, such as by merging data sets together from different sources or collecting our own data, like I mentioned previously. On this slide, I just have some examples here of interesting research that I've done on past studies. On the left, one study that I worked on was a review of Virginia's juvenile justice system in 2021. And so as part of that study, we did several site visits to facilities and had the opportunity to survey youth at the Juvenile Correctional Center. And so we asked them questions about whether they felt safe at the facility, whether they felt like they were benefiting from the programming they were receiving, whether their families could visit them on a regular basis, things like that. And that was interesting because there were actually two surveys of youth done previously in 2015 and 2018. So when we came in 2021, we were able to ask some of the same sets of questions and then could compare results across the years to see whether conditions in the facility had been improving. And then on the right side in 2020, I was on our marijuana legalization study. And so for that one, we were essentially asked to create a roadmap for everything the state would have to consider if it decided to legalize marijuana. And so as part of that study, we did a lot of interviews with other states that had already legalized to kind of hear about their lessons learned or things that they would do differently if they were in our position and had it to do over. And then also on that study, we analyzed prior arrest and conviction data for marijuana possession to determine whether there were any racial disparities in prior marijuana law enforcement. So that was an interesting piece of research from that study as well. And then the last thing I have on in my slides is just an example of kind of how our work can translate into better public policy. And so a couple of years ago, we did a study of indigent criminal defense, which is how the state provides legal representation to individuals who are charged with crimes but can't afford to hire their own attorney. And so in Virginia, some localities have a public defender office, but other localities rely on court-appointed attorneys. And those are private attorneys that provide representation to those defendants that are then reimbursed by the state for their services. And so one of the things that we found was that those court-appointed attorneys, that their pay rates had not been updated for many years. And so they were really underpaid compared to the amount of time that they were spending on cases and providing that representation. So one of the research methods that we used for this study, we did a bunch of structured focus groups and were able to quantify the amount of time that attorneys should be spending on a case to provide quality representation. And then the General Assembly took that information to update the pay rates for court-appointed attorneys to better align how much they are being paid with the time that they're spending on cases, which can help increase the quality of representation for defendants, but then also attract higher quality attorneys to serve in that role and provide that representation. So that was interesting as part of that study. Also, I see there maybe is a comment or a question here. Oh, yes, Travis is familiar of this.
Travis.
Great. Well, yeah. So I'll just close out, then we'll stop and y'all can ask questions if you have them. Just talk to you kind of for a minute about how to apply. So we're currently hiring for a policy analyst, and the process itself is pretty simple. But just, I guess, some of the things that Brittany and I have talked about, hopefully kind of tell you why it's good to work at JLARC. But, we look at a wide range of topics. You can have an impact. And I feel like we've worked hard here to create a good work environment. Aside for me, everybody who works here is very smart and good to work with. And I feel like we really work hard on the work-life balance thing. There's some times when it is kind of crunch time and it's a lot, but over the course of the year, I think, we try to give, understand that people have other things they want to do outside of work. We know that's important to people. For those of you that aren't familiar with Richmond, it's much smaller than the DC area, but it's big enough to still feel like a metro area. And I moved down here from DC over 20 years ago and really like it's just much more accessible, but there's still things to do. And I think it's a good balance there, just living in or around Richmond. Um, in terms of, what we offer at the entry level this year, we're starting at around 70K. Because it's state government, there's good benefits program. But I think one difference that I like to emphasize is because we're the legislative branch and have some flexibility, we can actually reward people more than a typical government agency for high performance. So we are able to do some things here that a lot of executive branch agencies in Virginia can't because of some of the rules. And we, within the confines of work and what's necessary to do, we let folks telecommute up to 2 days a week, depending on what's going on that week. So it's pretty simple. You go to our website, you click on a link. We have some, simple questions we ask about you as an applicant. Then our hiring panel will look at that and then decide if we want to get more information and maybe bring you in for an interview. But I'll stop there, and if y'all have any questions, be happy to answer.
This is a great opportunity to ask questions, folks. Feel free to unmute or to raise your hand, or I'm also looking in the chat box. And maybe if you want to stop sharing the slides so we can see if people are raising their hands, that's perfect. Emily.
Thank you guys for coming and telling us about JLARC. I'm really interested in the work you guys do, but what advice would you give to someone starting as a policy analyst?
Do you want to go first?
Yeah, go for it.
Um, I think being adaptable and flexible is probably the best thing I found that can really set you up for success, not only necessarily in this specific job, but I would assume anywhere. I just feel like when you're first starting out, especially, I mean, studies can change and you're kind of learning as you go. And you may think it's one thing when you start, but then you have to change the research methods, or something that you thought was important is not as important anymore. And I just think that the analysts that have been most successful at JLARC are the ones that are the best at kind of like rolling with the punches and just kind of keeping a positive attitude when things may not work out as planned, and just kind of staying flexible as things change throughout the course of a project.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. I guess the only thing I'd add is, and again, this isn't unique to us, but certainly anything involving government policy, there's a lot of complexity and backstory on everything. And so being willing to understand when you start that there's a lot of experience that you have to gain, and people who, have more experience or have been around, they can kind of teach you some things. So I think being very open to, in those first few years to taking feedback and incorporating that into how you do your work. I feel like sometimes the research is the easiest part, and what to do with it and what's a big deal and a little deal, kind of in the context of policy more broadly in state government. That's the hard part. And it takes years of experience to get to that point. There's still something that I get wrong, you know, every year, multiple things, and I've been doing this for a long time. So I think being patient with yourself and willing to take feedback is important too.
Great advice. Other questions? Hallie.
Hi, I'm just wondering if there's like specific types of past experiences that would be beneficial for this role, or what are you looking for as a policy analyst, and what types of like experiences do the people on your team have?
Yeah, another good question. I feel like one of the things that really helps is kind of having the core skill set that I think any good public policy or public administration program kind of forces you to develop. So that core analytical set, and some of that's software, but some of that's just like the inquisitive problem solving skill set. So I think having that curriculum is really helpful. And then I feel like, whether it's things like internships or stuff that you are required to do through your coursework, working with people externally, often in teams, to actually uh, do analysis and solve actual policy problems. A lot of times folks may have not had a job that directly aligns with this, but they've done multiple things where they have demonstrated that they can kind of decompose a policy problem into its component parts, analyze it, build it back up, and figure out what the solutions are. And I think that type of experience is probably the best thing that you can do before you come here. I don't know if you add anything to that, Brittany. It's okay if you don't, but
Yeah. The only thing I would say is that sometimes in kind of doing these sessions and talking with students before, we've gotten questions about like I don't have a I wouldn't consider myself like a quantitative person, or I maybe have done quantitative stuff, but I haven't done surveys before. And so like, is that a problem that I sort of specialize in one or the other, or kind of have interest in one or the other? And I would say that no, it's not. We have kind of a range of folks among the analysts, some that are like really, really good with quantitative stuff, and if we have teams that really need rigorous quantitative methods, they're the analysts that kind of get staffed on those. We also have analysts that specialize in qualitative methods and are more it, they're better at doing like surveys and more like complex interviews and focus groups and things like that. And then everybody else is kind of somewhere in the middle. So it's okay if you've done more of one or more of the other. You'll also develop a lot of that skill set of things that you haven't done before on the job. So don't feel like you need to have a certain level of one type of research experience in considering applying.
Wonderful. Thank you. We are at 12:30 and I want to wrap up and be mindful of everyone's time. I think you had your email addresses up on the screen. I don't know if it's possible to pop them up there one more time, or I'm happy to send them around also. But
I can do that if you give me. I was too smart. I closed the presentation already. It was a big mistake. Yeah,
I would say I can put my email in the chat if
that'd be
that
great. Yeah,
is
that would work well
helpful.
too. Sure. And then folks just keep your eye on the chat and grab it in case you have other questions. They've generously shared that with us. And Brittany and Justin, thank you so much. I want to find out how you were able to get buy-in from the different agencies when you have this administrative burden that's placed on them. I assume it's by showing them the results of the work that you've done with other agencies, but that was intriguing to me. So thank you, students, alums, for joining us. And everybody have pick up those email addresses and have a terrific rest of your day. Thanks all.
thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.